Yeah, we're going to, excuse me, just a second, ladies and gentlemen. Before we come to order, we're going to put a sign-up sheet down here. If anyone wishes to speak to the measure, if you'd come and let us know. Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we could go ahead and settle down, we're a couple of minutes past the appointed hour, and we have a hard stop at 3 o'clock, so I want us to get moving. Did you have something you needed this? Okay. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Call this subcommittee meeting of the Energy, Public Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee of the Georgia House to order. And before us this afternoon for discussion, House Bill 1083. Chairman Setzler, we're still working off LC 365045, the original bill. All right, if you would take your spot, we'll turn you on. As the chair, as Chairman Setzler takes his point, I'll just ask you to go over the measure. And remember, we have 9 speakers and 51 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, the subcommittee, I so appreciate your attention to this issue. Now, the broader question we're facing here is what's the future of energy in Georgia, and what are the components of that? It's exciting. We had the chair had a hearing of the full committee a week and a half ago about this issue, and what was exciting for me is that the state of Georgia is making a large commitment to solar. In fact, one of the large solar providers in the state, the largest, came in and said they're making a commitment of 2,300 megawatts of a new capacity coming online in the coming decades to bring the total capacity in Georgia up to roughly 30% of capacity. That won't be the total energy that's generated, but the capacity. What that means is Georgia is making a major commitment to solar. The question is, as that commitment is being realized and brought into existence, what is the mix of the solar that we're going to produce? Should the mix be all or essentially overwhelmingly utility scale, or should there be a mix of utility scale solar with distributed solar? Distributed solar meaning solar on the rooftops or yards of homeowners, and also in the business produced by folks who are commercial applications, whether they're a shopping center or whether they're a manufacturing plant, producing solar for themselves on site, primarily for their own consumption, and then secondarily to be shared around and put back on the grid as necessary. What this bill does, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is it recognizes that part of that mix needs to be, or should be, distributed solar, and seeks to create a framework where the advantages of distributed solar can be recognized and the downside of distributed solar can be avoided. One of the premises in all this, if you think back, people ask the question, and as you hear discussion around this issue, Mr. Chairman, this issue comes up of, well, does solar on rooftops cost more than creating a big utility scale solar farm down in Jeff Davis County? We've got both the EMCs and Georgia Power they engage in third-party contracts with developers to bring online large solar projects to support the solar portfolio we have today and that we're going to be bringing on board. We recognize that even as solar rates come down, and they're becoming very competitive, it does cost a little more money to create energy by solar than it does. For example, once you build the nuclear plant's the cheapest way to produce this base load and produce additional kilowatt hours of electricity. But we're doing it. We as a state are going to be, we're willing, and we've shown a willingness, and the PSC has stood behind this with Georgia Power in particular, but it's true across the EMCs and the entire segment, or this segment of the power generation economy here in Georgia, that the commitment to solar has benefits such as reducing carbon emissions. There's a different profile that solar produces in terms of cleanliness and the avoidance of some of the other benefits, some of the other detriments of using coal, nuclear, and otherwise, and it needs to be part of the mix. So what HB 1083 does, Mr. Chairman, it simply says, hey, is we know we're bringing solar on board. Solar is going to be dramatically increased in the amount of power we produce within Georgia. How can we define a percentage of that that's going to be distributed? And what this bill does is it caps at 10% the amount of power that's going to be generated by distributed solar, which is rooftop and commercial applications, that's not by the utilities. Because when you look at studies, the Trump administration's Department of Energy said in 2017 that when you get above 10% of your capacity being produced by distributed solar, you start to have these issues of cross-subsidization. Someone who doesn't produce solar ends up net subsidizing someone that does. But below 10%, there's not cross-subsidization. You're going to hear a lot of the folks today come and tell you how this is bad. It's going to drive up the cost of electricity for the entire Georgia economy because of this issue of cross-subsidization. It's also going to create a circumstance where people who aren't producing solar pay for those that do. But the cross-subsidization issue really only emerges when you exceed 10% capacity. That's why this bill caps it at 10%. What this bill does, it would say capping at 5% would be the amount of solar that's produced through residential applications. Capping at 5%, the distributed solar that would be produced in commercial applications. So that if a manufacturing plant moves to your community and produces a lot of solar, they're not competing for the same limits that mom and pop are. There's sort of an economy here for mom and pop as homeowners. There's an economy here for distributed solar producers that are commercial, but capping it at 10% because that's the threshold. The Department of Energy in 2017 says, if you become like California, you start to have problems. California is near 20%, and they do have issues, and that's been very well documented. You're going to have folks come and tell you today later that's happening, and that is happening. But that 10% threshold is important because as you're producing extra power that you're not using in your own location, you're putting it back on the grid. Your neighbors nearby are using that power. It's not going through substations. It's not being transmitted all the way across the state to other parts of the state. The grid almost becomes a holding area for the electrons that are being produced. If a solar array is producing a little bit more than that home needs right now, your next door neighbor can use it. It's not having to transmit through the entire network. It's only when you get above 10% that you start to see this issue of too much solar capacity at single periods of time that create this cross-subsidization effect. Stepping through this, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to dive into the bill here momentarily. So this issue of cross-subsidy versus what the market can bear in a thoughtful way without creating these perverse effects. I talked about this 10% limitation. That's why the cap's there. I talked about we as a state are committed to solar and to bringing on dramatically more solar over the next decades. Why can't a percentage of that be planned in as being distributed, not being done at utility scale? And then as we step into what's fair for mom and pop, we ask the question, the capacity fees. I think you have in your folder the capacity fees that are being charged by some of the municipal providers. I list here. I'm not going to pick on any in particular, but there is one municipal provider in particular that in addition to the monthly flat rate for providing power service from the power company that every customer pays, that's the rate that even if you use no power, that's the rate that it costs for the power provider to hook you up and provide you service every month. Beyond that fixed rate that everybody pays, there's an additional rate that if you produce solar yourself and you're still on the grid, there's a monthly fee that's being charged just because you produce solar in your home. Okay, you can see the sheet here that's got the red numbers on the left side. I think you see that should be in your package. There's actually one of our providers in the state that charges.
We don't have that information. Okay. Did you give that to the?
I'm sorry. I thought you had that. Forgive me, Mr. Chairman.
We'll check it. I saw some folks.
So I'll wrap that up by saying there's actually a solar provider. There's actually a power provider in the state that if you're producing solar power in your house, and you have a 5 kilowatt solar array, which is half the size of what the max could be. 10 kW is the max size to be considered solar, a residential customer. If you have an array that is half that size, one of the providers charges $155 per month just to have that on your house and still be connected to the grid. Now that's the high end. On the lower end, one of my providers in my community only charges $20 a month. Okay, but that's every single month just because you have a solar array on your roof of 5 kW in size. What that means over a 30-year life cycle, the solar cost in my community, that would be a $7,400 cost over the life cycle of a system just because you have it on your roof. I think there's broad understanding those numbers that needs to be, those fees need to be revisited. And if you're in the high end, paying $155 a month, that is a $56,000 cost over the life of the system just because you have solar power on your roof connected to the grid. So I want us to, Mr. Chairman, address the issue of those fees, and this bill does that. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, before I take questions on the specifics of the bill, Mr. Chairman, when you think about how we bring solar into existence in Georgia now in a utility context, it's largely third-party providers. You know, there are capital investment companies that are willing to loan money to solar developers. They build solar farms. They set up contracts with utilities and provide those at utility scale, whether it's a 3 megawatt array or something even larger. Those deals that are put together create payback on the cost of capital of 7 to 10 years. So if you put down, you put down $10 million in building a big solar farm, that $10 million is paid back in between 7 to 10 years in the rates that we're paying our utility scale developers. The power company pays these developers, and they get their money back in 7 to 10 years for their capital, and that's how they make their return, right? So if utility scale producers that produce solar for our economy are getting their money back in 7 to 10 years, why shouldn't mom and pop get their money back in the same 7 to 10 years? Why is it that mom and pop should be paid a rate that they're getting their money back in 25 or 30 or 35 years? What we're seeing in this bill is you look at the economics of this and you study the economics of what's proposed in this monthly netting bill is the return on capital. Mom and pop get their money back out of their system at the same rate that big utility scale producers will get their money back from their capital investment. That's what we're asking for. Now, we do it through a process called monthly netting, but when you look at the numbers, you kind of take a deeper dive in this, we're simply asking that mom and pop or the shopping center owner gets the same return on their capital that the big utility scale providers get on theirs, Mr. Chairman. That's really the essence of how this bill folds together. What it does and the way that it does that is it creates that structure that if you're a producer and you have you're a homeowner that has solar on your rooftop, you consume what you produce, and if you produce more than you consume and you're putting electricity back on the grid, at the end of the month, what you consume is subtracted by what you put back on the grid, and the balance of that is what you pay your bill on. So if I were to consume 600 kilowatt hours in a month and put back 400 kilowatt hours onto the grid, I pay 200 kilowatt hours. It's called monthly netting. That's what this bill proposes to do. And it's as simple as that. If I use 600 and I produce 500, I pay 100. If I consume 600 and I produce 200, I pay 400. It's a simple equation, and it's netted at the end of the month. And what that does is it allows the recovery of your investment for mom and pop and for a shopping center owner or a manufacturing plant owner to be roughly equivalent to that of a utility scale producer. And I believe that approach needs to be part of the mix. We don't need to produce all of our power on rooftops and on housetops, but a mix of it in our state, I would suggest, needs to be. And if we were to say, what should that percentage look like? Should it be 80-20? Should it be 60-40? Should it be 70-30? We're simply suggesting that if the state's going to have 30% of its capacity in total solar, 5% of that should be on housetops, 5% of that can be in places of business, and that 20% could be utility scale, done by the big developers through the power companies and delivered in the ways that we're seeing it so successfully delivered today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to take questions on the bill.
Subcommittee have questions to the gentleman? Subcommittee have questions? I want to ask you just two or a couple of quick questions. I actually have a couple out here. All I have numbers here. Number 20, is that you, Representative Fraser? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Sells, I need you to look on line 29 through 31. I want to read that to you really quickly, Mr. Chairman. Bidirectional metering means measuring the amount of electricity supplied by an electric service provider and the amount fed back to the electric service provider by the customer's distributed generation facility using the same meter. What did I just read?
That's the definition of bidirectional metering. And as the lady knows, it's counting the electrons that flow into my property. It's counting the electrons that flow off of my property, and it allows us to make the calculations we're talking about in this bill.
One further question. Representative Seltzer, I am trying to understand the solar panels. I do have some neighbors that have these panels on their home, not a lot, but a few. And so I'm just going to quickly just do a solar panel 101.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I'm trying to understand, I haven't been in their home, so I don't know how this stuff works. I do know that the panels are up there on the home. They have this big, huge box that tells them how much sun is being generated through the panel, so they know how much energy they have to consume. Now, I'm looking long-term, so now they're also on the grid. So they with an EMC, so you got that meter attached to the house. You got this meter, this solar panel thing attached, and so you got two forms of energy to heat and cool this house. Now, you correct me, because I'm just having a visual, trying to understand how this works. So if they don't have enough solar energy they have consumed, say during the summer months to warm that house up during the winter time, of course they're gonna hit the grid.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about a cap of 10%. If they go past this cap to generate energy to warm this house, who in that time subsidized that cost?
Yeah. Well, let me separate the question so I can answer it. The 10% number is that's just kind of across a provider service area, whether it's an EMC or whether it's a Georgia Power. What we're saying is within Georgia Power's region, under this program, right now there's a cap at a fraction of 1% of the customers that can do this monthly netting process, this balance. You just take what you consume and you take what you produce and you balance it out. Okay? A fraction of their customers can do this now. What we're saying is under this bill is that 5% of their total system can be residential customers, and 5% of their total system can be commercial customers that are producing this for themselves. That's what the 10% cap means. So if you're wanting to participate in this and you get in and you're one of the first 5% if you as a customer are part of the 5% of the entire network, then you get to participate in this program. It's capped right now at a much lower rate. So we're really just, this exists today. We're just raising the cap dramatically to what the number of people who can participate. Okay? So that 5% cap for residential, 5% for commercial only applies to who's eligible for the program. Okay? Once you're in the program, though, what we're seeing here is if you produce electricity and you consume it, then it just reduces your power bill. If you produce more electricity, maybe it's a spring day where the air conditioner or the heat's not on, but the sun's shining, you're producing a lot of electricity, then you can actually start putting electricity back on the grid. You're rather than consuming power, you're actually producing net power, and your neighbors around you can start to use that. That's what we mean. We're netting out that amount.
Representative Seltzer,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
understand that part. The part I don't understand is that I'm not storing my own solar energy. I'm putting it back on the grid.
Yes, ma'am.
For others to consume. My question to you is, if I don't have enough, and I'm not in that promotional period that you're talking about, if I'm this first 5% or whatever, if I'm just a regular solar consumer, if I do not have enough energy, that's all I want to know. If I do not have enough and have to go on the grid, who incurs those costs? You used the word cross-subsidizing. Cross-subsidizing means someone else has to incur those costs.
Yeah.
And is it me?
No, if you have a rooftop solar system, the first thing you do is when you produce solar power, your house uses it first. Okay? So any power needs you have in your home are being first taken off your solar panels. Okay? Does that make sense? If you're producing more than you need, you put that back on the grid, and those electrons are there for other folks to use.
But if I'm not?
Okay, we have other questions, 9 people
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Reel us in just a
Thank you,
bit there.
Representative
We'll come
Self.
back to you if we have a moment, Representative. Representative Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Seltzler. This is an interesting bill, to say the least. I was looking through, and around line 147, in that paragraph, it mentions the commission, which, according to the definition, is the Public Service Commission. How does this impact EMCs and MEAGs that don't fall under the PSC?
Yeah. What this does is, in essence, I talked about the first 5% of residential and first 5% of commercial get to participate in this program. Once you get more people participating than that, the PSC would look at what the appropriate sort of fair rate ought to be for people who aren't within this program, and would set that. That applies to Georgia Power. You know, Georgia Power is obviously an enormous player in our state, and that threshold would be applied across the system, both for Georgia Power and EMCs, as the de facto fair rate that's in essence had a rate case level analysis. I mean, to dig into these things beyond that, when you get above this 10%, that's where you start to understand. That's where you start to see the potential for this cross subsidization to happen. Below that, DOE studies say that there's not cross subsidization. When you get above that, because that becomes a factor, there needs to be a rate case level of detail in a study that says, well, you're not going to get as much back because we're starting to see this cross subsidization issue emerge. And we felt like that it needed that kind of, if PSC believed, and the PSC has the power to do this, if they believed that it needed that level of analysis, they could do it and apply that across the state. Because above 10%, that's where the economics get a little bit more complex.
Okay. May I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Briefly.
Briefly.
We just got others, and we got 9 speakers, and
All right.
we're on the clock.
So right now, my understanding is that EMCs and MEAGs do not fall under jurisdiction of the PSC,
That's
correct?
correct. That's correct.
So this essentially would, to some degree, be putting them under jurisdiction of PSC if they were allowed to raise that percentage by 5%.
What this does is it creates it empowers the EMC to do the rate case level of analysis to figure out what that fair balance is. It doesn't set them under the PSC in the way that our for-profit power companies are, but it does empower the PSC because they've got the expertise, the staff, and the resources to do that analysis. Someone's got to do it. Well, I believe someone should do it because we want to be fair, and it empowers them to do that.
All right.
But it does not give them regulatory control over the other.
I'll discuss further offline. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Setzler. I'm going to make a really, really quick, blunt question. Whatever you sell out to the grid, what rate would that be at according to this bill?
Well, what this does is that the same rate that you pay when you consume power. For example, if I were to turn my lights off and go on vacation and power my home down, I get for example, if I'm paying 14 cents per kilowatt hour for power, and I turn my power off and I go on vacation, I mothball my house, I save 14 cents per kilowatt hour of everything I avoid. What this does is rather than, if I were to produce power today, not part of this program, I pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour for power. I might, if I'm selling back to the grid today, I might get 4 or 5 cents back, a wholesale rate, as opposed to what this does is it simply says, because I put back at the same rate that I pay, the net is, in essence, it's a retail rate that I'm able to, as if I put it back, I have a full retail rate avoidance, not just a wholesale rate avoidance.
Okay, so I'm sorry, just to follow up, but I just want to make sure I understand. So what you put back out to the grid, say, whatever X number of units you put out to the grid, you're getting paid what you pay from the power company.
I get an avoidance.
Okay.
If I produce, at the end of the month, if I produce more than I use,
right,
I sell back at a wholesale rate. But if it's simply getting me back towards zero, my avoidance rate is a full retail rate avoidance.
And I agree with you on that. But my question is not so much what you avoid using, but what you're selling back out to the grid. What rate would that be at? The wholesale rate or the retail rate?
It's the retail rate. That's
So you're
the
selling-
essence of this bill.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
And I say that because when you think about the
All
overall.
right, we're gonna move on. We ask and answered. If I was a judge, I always wanted to be one. Ask and answer. Number 34. Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Sessler, I have a question being a non-solar member. Will any of this cost be passed to non-solar members such as myself and others?
Well, the study I alluded to earlier, the Department of Energy published in 2017 says when they looked at states that have less solar and more solar, they said when you get above 10%, there is a sense in which there's cross-subsidization, that people who don't use solar end up paying more. The DOE study in 2017 says, however, if you're less than 10%, which is what the limitations this bill provides, there's not a cross-subsidization. And the reason behind that is if you want to think about it from a layman's terms, if the sun is shining and people aren't using much energy, and people from their homes' rooftops are putting power back into the grid, their next door neighbor and people around them are using it. It doesn't go up through the substations, through the primary distribution lines. The consumers around them are consuming the electrons they put back on the grid. So
Chairman Sessler, I'm going to interrupt you because with due respect, I've been doing this for about 15 years, and nobody in this room knows exactly where the electrons go once they go on the system. It's a ubiquitous system, so you can't say here and say that they're generating this house and this house needs them. They go straight. They may or they may not. No electrons are stored. I mean, I know this is a fact of physics. No electrons are stored on the grid. No electron is generated at a generation plant until somebody flips a light on to use it. So we'll get somebody from the PSC here and talk about that, or we'll get a physics professor, but neither of us, I think, know exactly how the grid works. There's a book out that said the grid is the most complex machine ever made by man, and for us to simplify it and say that it's built on this roof and it goes to the person next door, so you don't need the rest of the grid, is just way oversimplifying it. We had another question, Chairman Carson's.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just say again, that's why I referenced the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory said that at below 10%, there's no cross-subsidization.
Well, I respectfully, what they said in that report, because I've seen one very similar, is it's not noticeable if it's below 10% because you have such a small amount of people that are subsidizing such a large amount of people. It's not noticeable till it's over 10%. But I would respectfully say, and we'll get somebody in here to answer the question, that from the first unit, some amount of money is done. And the reason for that is whether you have solar on your house or not, a regulated utility is required by law to build stranded infrastructure or infrastructure that sometimes becomes stranded if it's not used to provide you facilities. But you and I can debate that at a different time, or we'll get an expert in. Chairman Carson.
Thank you, Chairman Martin. Chairman Sessler, thank you for bringing this bill. I think Chairman Martin's comment just kind of covered my point, because I did listen to the discussion last week on Zoom in regard to this bill, and I completely understand and sympathize in regard to the doctrine of fairness, the whole idea of fairness. But I think if we look at just one side of it in regard to the revenue, in other words, I pay Georgia Power or I pay Sony EMC 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and if I produce it, they gave me 12 cents per kilowatt hour. But I want to, it's just a comment, and I'd be interested in, Chairman Sessler, your comments in regard to this. In regard to the powers, the electrons going back and forth at a certain rate, I understand that fairness. What I don't understand is that there's a completely different cost structure, whereas Georgia Power, if I turn the lights on, I expect Georgia Power to deliver. And there's not that same expectation, that same requirement of service delivery under the Territorial Services Act for a solar panel. So if it's cloudy for 24 hours and it's 6 a.m. and I want to turn on my lights, if they don't work, I'm not going to call my solar energy provider. I'm going to call Georgia Power, because they have that obligation of service. That obligation of service leads to a completely different cost model. It's like saying I could go to CVS and buy a Band-Aid, but I could also go to Piedmont Hospital and they have a whole array of services in addition to a Band-Aid. You understand? That's a completely different cost model. I understand the revenue fairness, but you got to understand these service providers have a different threshold or requirement of service than whether or not it's the sun's been shining for a solar panel.
Which is precisely why we can't power our entire economy on solar, and no one would rationally propose that we do so. The issue is is the distributed solar is more hedged than, if we had, for example, if we had 3 megawatts of distributed solar on homes all across North Georgia,
Okay.
that is a more resilient system in which we can have more confidence than if we have one solar farm within one, 100-acre area. If there's clouds and rain over that area, the entire 3 megawatts is diminished because of the impact on that one location. Distributed solar spreads it across a large geography that creates less spikes and valleys in the solar production. So that the resiliency value of that and the consistency value of that is a benefit in and of itself. And I'm not trying to capture those costs financially, but there's actual value to that. So I think to your point, solar can't be the full answer, but solar is going to be a large part of Georgia's answer. We've said that. So why don't we have it be distributed and take the advantage of the geographic distribution of that capacity as opposed to putting massive dollars into single locations that can create spikes? I think there's some wisdom of having a blend of that, right? And that's what the bill proposes. We have a blend of big utility scale and
if it's
distributed
completely, let's say it's a Monday like today and the sun's not shining. Oh, that kind of ruins my example with you, but okay, let's pretend it's cloudy. Let's pretend it's cloudy all day Monday today, and then the batteries overnight on my photovoltaic system at home, let's say they completely drain, and it's 6 a.m. and I want power. And I turn it on, I hope there's a connection to an EMC or a MEAG affiliated city or Georgia Power, what have you, because there's not that same requirement on the photo cell, on the solar cells, correct?
Absolutely. Completely. Which is absolutely why we cannot depend solely on solar power.
Which is why I say there's a different standard of service, which leads to a different cost, which leads to a different revenue.
Yes, but if we're making the decision that 30% of the capacity in the state of Georgia will be solar, and that's the direction the state's moving, we've made that commitment. Once that ship has sailed, we've made a commitment of this much capacity. The question is how much of that capacity should be in big farms and how much of it should be distributed. This creates a circumstance where the distributed solar out there gets the same return on its investment that folks who build those big farms do. There's got to be a mix even of the kind of solar we bring on. We need to have big farms and we need to have distributed solar. So we've already decided we're going to have solar as part of our solution. We just need to have a diversity of the solar that we have, and that's what this bill does. So there's commonality of the return on investment of the diversity of solar resources we bring on board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any other questions from the committee right now. We're going to go ahead and move into our speakers. We've got 9 speakers, 2 minutes each. Will give us 20 minutes right up to 3 o'clock. Chairman, thank you for your presentation there. Mr. Thatcher Young, if you'll come on up. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I'll try to keep my remarks brief. My name is Thatcher Young. I'm an owner of Velo Solar, located here in Emmons Park. We're a 14-year-old solar design build firm that specializes in consumer-owned solar generation, as the chairman was describing. We're one of many small businesses in some of the 5,000 Georgians in our state's clean energy economy. We're working every day to create sustainable local jobs and create greater energy independence for Georgians. Today, I'd like to just say a few words on behalf of my customers, solar owners. They're seeking a fair price for solar energy, as the chairman said. And we're here to support House Bill 1083 because we believe it goes a long way to create a stable, predictable, and free market for clean energy owners are looking for. Our current energy market favors large utilities and penalizes small business owner, investors, and homeowners. This isn't fair in a capital-driven free market economy, and we're seeing a convergence. The Super Bowl was dominated by EV ads for the Lightning, the Hummer, soon Georgia's own Rivian. Consumers want electric vehicles, they want batteries in their home, and they want solar on their roofs to control their energy future. Our customers shouldn't be charged more for the right to generate their own energy, and it doesn't mean that the cost to their neighbor goes up. I'm a Georgia Natural Gas customer, and they don't charge me more or less each month based on the number of houses in my neighborhood who are heated or cooled by gas versus electric. You can get to choose the system you want based on cost and comfort, and shouldn't electricity be the same? By the same logic, it's simply untrue that homes with solar are causing their neighbors' bills to go up. Even after going solar, residential solar customers in Georgia often use 30% more than their neighbors. These EVs suck electrons. They're still buying mostly utility-generated electricity, and they're paying for it. But solar customers help reduce their consumption and their environmental impact, just like other conservation measures. Lastly, monthly netting simply allows these solar owners to receive a fair price for the power they are generating at a reasonable return on their investment, just like the utilities. Utilities that oppose net metering believe they're entitled to make a certain amount of revenue from their customers, and they alone deserve a fair rate of return on those power generation investments. We believe that this entitlement is anti-competitive and hurts Georgians' ability to control their rising electricity bills. House Bill 1083's monthly netting provision and the removal of the solar taxes and fees that the chairman most astutely pointed out is solar owners' fair price for solar energy. In conclusion, the solar owner investor represented here today needs your help to bring stability, predictability, and create a free, clean energy market for all Georgians. Like y'all, we want more clean energy jobs, investment, and growth to make Georgia the top destination for clean energy in our country.
Thank you.
With that, I
Thank you,
conclude my
Thatcher.
remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't have my mic on there. Cody, you'll follow Carl. If I please, for the speakers, if you'll keep your comments to 2 minutes, just so we can get through everybody. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Carl, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Carl Goodhue, Tucker, Georgia. I was introduced to solar with my father-in-law who lives in Florida. I've done a tremendous amount of research and received multiple quotes before getting solar installed on my house. My main motivating factor was to reduce my insanely high electric bill. It was over $600 the month after I moved in, and I've taken many steps to reduce that, including installing a heat pump, new LED lights, insulation, and solar was the next logical step. So I laid the groundwork. I invested over $36,000 of my own money, cash, and I don't get a 10.9% guaranteed rate of return. So I have to rely on you guys to help me with that. Not many homes are perfect, and mine isn't either. It's west-facing, not south-facing, so I'll only offset about 75% of my bill. I'll still be paying electric bills every month, significant electric bills. I signed my contract on June 11th, installed October 6th, but I had to wait permission from Georgia Power to turn it on and officially received that February 9th, 4 months later. It's not an easy process. I was project number 4,458 out of the 5,000 people permitted by Georgia Power to spend my own capital and produce power to rebuy it at night. Homeowners have to do a lot of research before spending a significant amount of money, and I produce 90% of my power between noon and 6 p.m. This also aligns with the time that Georgia Power believes that that is an important time to produce power. They charge higher rates through their time of use rate, and I'm aligned with that. I'm giving back to the grid during the times that Georgia Power says they want power. I would like my neighbors to have the same ability to get solar and get the same return on capital that the company does, and that makes sense. And unfortunately, I'm not afforded the title of a monopoly, so I have to rely on my representation here to make sure that I'm given the chance to sell my electric generation back at the rate that makes sense and is fair. Thank you,
sir. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for being with us today. Cody, you'll be followed by Katie Childs. If you'll be ready, Miss Katie. Thank you.
Hey, thank y'all. Good afternoon. My name is Cody Nord. I serve as the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. For over 17 years, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light has worked with local churches, congregations, faith communities, and schools in an effort to protect God's creation as it manifests here in Georgia. We've worked with hundreds and hundreds of congregations, churches, schools, and their stewardship teams all across Georgia, Augusta, Columbus, LaGrange, Savannah, Brunswick, of course, across Atlanta. And I can tell you firsthand that solar for churches is notoriously difficult because at cost and the lack of tax credits, to date there are only at most 20 solar installations on faith-based institutions across the state of Georgia out of 15,000 houses of worship. Net metering is one of the only pathways that churches could take advantage to save money and build resiliency in their community and install solar more affordably. We're currently working with almost 100 congregations to explore these options, and yet the barriers remain. Monthly netting would open up the options to finance their systems differently for these churches and more readily take advantage of the savings produced through solar. The money saved through solar typically means more resources for a church's mission. It means more food in the food bank, more backpacks for school kids. It means more money in mission in congregations and communities. This solar also gives communities and customers some independence. It gives them choice. And I think churches and communities of faith should have the opportunity to implement solar effectively and fairly. They should have the opportunity, as their faith calls them, to act. They should have the ability to be good stewards of not only their energy, but also their electricity bills. This is especially important in light of some big ticket items that we all know are coming for us quite soon. One example is the cost associated with Plant Vogel. Gil's been engaged on this issue for quite some time, and regardless of what happens with Vogels, what we know is that customers, nonprofits, schools, churches, worshiping communities, are going to have to bear the cost for almost the $10.7 billion just Georgia Power's share that's going to hit churches and schools. They have no ability to implement solar or any other things else with their investments to dodge those and put money back into their communities. Our members and Georgia faith communities need choice to implement their faith. With rates on the rise and community needs also on the rise, we need people to be able to do what's right for their people, for their community, for their faith, and for their mission. Net metering would absolutely help these communities procure solar more affordably and effectively, and so I would ask that you support this measure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cody. Ms. Katie, followed by Karen. Remember, if you will, please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. My name's Katie Childs-Ottenweller. I'm the Southeast Director of Vote Solar. And when I'm not here speaking to all you lovely people, I spend most of my time at the Public Service Commission. I'm an attorney, and I want to talk about some facts about solar customers, because I know there's been a lot of questions about are solar customers paying their fair share today, and when you go solar, are you raising rates on other customers? Evidence shows that homeowners with solar are actually paying more than their fair share today, and I'm going to talk about why. So solar customers are effectively using the grid to store their electrons. They then pull those electrons later on at night when their solar system isn't generating. It's kind of like rollover minutes on your cell phone, if you remember having cell phone plans back in the day. Rather than a sale of electricity, net metering is actually a one-to-one trade. The solar homeowner puts electrons onto the grid. They get used in the neighborhood. The utility gets to sell those electrons. In exchange, the solar homeowner gets a credit against that electron that he pulls back from the grid later on during the month. This is the same crediting mechanism that Georgia Power offers to its community solar subscribers. They also get net metering. What we're asking is for their competitors to get the same treatment that Georgia Power is giving based on its own product. I want to talk about 4 quick reasons why solar customers, when they reduce their utility bills, are not creating costs on other customers. One is data from Georgia Power actually shows that people who are adopting solar are still paying more on their electricity bills than the average residential customer. This is because most people who go solar have really high bills, and so they were using more than the average electricity to begin with. Even after they go solar, they're still paying more than the average in terms of utility bills. These folks are not zeroing out their bills by any means. Second, a study filed by Duke Energy in South Carolina, where they have 5 times as much rooftop solar as we have here, shows that rooftop solar actually makes customers cheaper for their utilities to serve. Because their electricity is generated and used right on their local distribution system, they are reducing the utilities cost by 75% in terms of the transmission and production costs of electricity. Utilities that actually take this into account are able to lower their costs. They don't have to upgrade that transmission line. They don't have to build that new power plant when enough of their customers install rooftop solar. Third, solar adoption is so low today and for the foreseeable future in Georgia that there simply isn't enough solar to impact other customer bills. And fourth, cost shifts can only exist when utilities have a revenue shortfall. which isn't the case for Georgia Power. In each of the past 10 years, Georgia Power has netted higher profits for its shareholders than what was authorized by the commission in its target return on equity. That amounts to $780 million in extra revenue over the last 10 years. So if I'm a solar customer and I lower my bill, I might be reducing profits for my monopoly's shareholders, but I'm not necessarily creating costs on other customers. The evidence is clear in Georgia that solar customers are in fact paying more than their fair share, even though they cost less to serve. As long as customers are contributing to grid costs, they should be able to access the full conservation benefits of investing in rooftop solar, and that's exactly what this bill will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see we have a question here or two from the subcommittee. Let me go ahead and call up, is it Karen, is it Raymond? Is that a right, or I don't know if it's an R or K. Yes, sir. Better Tomorrow Solar? Yes, sir, you're next. While you're coming up, I see some questions out, but if the subcommittee will bear with me, let's get to all of our speakers, and then if we have time to do that, we'll ask them if they'll take questions. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. What we can all agree on is that the electrification of transportation, heating and cooking and so on will increase demand a lot in this decade. Estimates go from 40% to a doubling by 2030 and beyond. So the question is, who's going to pay for these investments in the generation, transmission, and distribution of that power? And what distributed power generation does, in part, is to take some of that pressure and shift the cost of those investments from the utility to business and residential customers. And that will save everybody money. And two recent studies, in addition to the Duke Energy study that was mentioned, corroborate that conclusion. One by researchers in Princeton University, and the other one by Vibrant Clean Energy, which estimates that there will be close to $500 billion in savings nationally if we allow by distributed generation of power. So net metering is one of the best ways to encourage distributed generation of power. Thank you.
Jeff Pratt. Wilson Lawrence on that. Jeff, we gotta get you moving faster than that. I can say that from having run across the street back.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you so much for the brief time to speak to you. I'm Jeff Pratt. I'm president of Green Power EMC. We represent the electric cooperatives in the state of Georgia. The electric cooperatives in the state of Georgia serve about half of the population of the state of Georgia, residential population, the very population that we're talking about here in this bill. We, as co-ops, are not-for-profit utilities. Our profits any profits we make are returned to our members, our customers, and in that way, it's a zero-sum game. We have to pay for all of the infrastructure to turn on the lights at the moment anybody asks for it, and we have to be ready to provide that power and have the infrastructure to do that at any moment in time. We are very supportive of rooftop solar. We want the market to drive it. We don't want cross-subsidization, which this bill would require to make that happen. And so it is very important that we consider very carefully the options for moving forward. Other states who have been down this path, as mentioned earlier, are moving backwards and coming back to the place where they've decided this cross-subsidization does not work. I would hate to see Georgia go down that same path only to have to come back later. Our rooftop solar today is doubling, compoundingly doubling every year for the last 5 years. It is growing, despite having these other programs and subsidies that other states have tried and are now backing away from. The last thing I want to say is this, is that I want to hit on this whole cross-subsidization piece from a standpoint of cost. Now, if I can build a large-scale solar facility, provide energy at that facility may cost 25 or 30% of a rooftop solar system, and by the way, it will generate almost 50% more energy because it efficiently does that. The value of that to our non-for-profit members, owners, is much better than rooftop solar, and that's the reason the market has driven us in that direction. Lastly, though, I will say that any member who wants to put rooftop solar on, we're very supportive of it. I think there are places in bills like this that we can work together to create opportunities for rooftop solar to work better, but unfortunately, this bill just is not it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wilson Mallard with appreciate the opportunity. Wilson Mallard, representing Georgia Power's Renewable Development Department. Thanks for letting me speak to you again. Just to reiterate some of my points from the last time, I do have good news to share. Solar is growing robustly in Georgia, and it's growing from every type of solar resource, the utility scale resources that we've talked about, but also distributed generation, both rooftop solar and a very robust distributed generation program that Georgia has. We are growing solar, but we're doing it in a way that benefits all customers. We try to get solar at the best cost we possibly can. And that's exactly what we're able to do and what the Cogen Act has been doing for our customers for years, to purchase that energy back at the avoided cost rate. To respectfully disagree with some of the words that have been said before, I do believe that the cost shift begins from kilowatt hour one. I also believe that from a rate or a policy design standard, the last thing you would want to do was to make a policy decision with the understanding that it is going to or will eventually accumulate enough to make a noticeable amount. As I look around at some of the other states around us, the Californias, the Floridas, the Louisianas, that are having to undo their net metering policies and programs, and the pain that that's caused, it just seems like not really a efficient way to go about it. I would not want to create a market here in Georgia based on this overpayment, paying a retail rate, 12 cents kilowatt hour for Georgia Power's retail customers, when in fact the market can deliver that same energy at 3 or 4 cents. And in fact, our renewable cost benefit analysis that takes into account all of the benefits of rooftop solar, the avoided transmission, the avoided generation, it really does show that that's the value that solar provides customers. We recognize those purchases through our fuel clause. They are a straight pass through to our customers. So every kilowatt hour we purchase for 12 cents instead of the 3 or 4 cents we could get it in the marketplace is upward rate pressure on customers for day one. Let me just close by saying there's not an issue here. I see our rooftop solar market growing by leaps and bounds here in Georgia. Now, the market was stimulated absolutely by the net metering pilot, the 5,000 customer pilot approved by the Public Service Commission. But we've been full for almost a year, and we've not seen that much of a drop-off, y'all, in the number of applications. February, right now, I checked again this morning, we're on pace for either our 3rd or 4th biggest month ever for rooftop solar. So the market continues to grow, and if we can grow the market by paying a price that is fair and keeps rates low, it's my opinion that's what we should keep doing. That's why Georgia Power is not in favor of the changes proposed here in 1083. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Scott Starwitz. I'm the CFO and founder of the SAE School. The SAE School is a preschool through 8th grade 501c3 nonprofit located in Mableton, Georgia. Two of the items that make us unique is that we are a year-round school and that we are the first school in Georgia to become 100% solar. Being a year-round school, that means we have a break around every 6 weeks or so, and obviously we're not in weekends either. And by becoming the first school in Georgia to be 100% solar, we save around $3,000 a month. That savings allows us to reinvest in our teachers, their professional development, resources, so that we can provide a better quality product to our students. In conclusion, the SAE school benefits from having monthly netting, and we are in support of it. Thank you.
And good day to you fine people. To introduce myself, my name is Jonelle Menifee with Solar Time USA. It's a family-owned firm. And I want to give you so much thanks and respect for allowing us to speak on behalf of our customers today. So in terms of the net metering concept, when you think of the 3 pillars of the solar consumer rights, you know, number 1 is the equipment, number 2 is to make sure that the installer is a good installer and able to perform, and number 3 is the solar policies. And in terms of net metering, when you have a client that's paying 14 cents for electricity and maybe getting 2 cents to hopefully 3 cents back, you know, that is a gap. And I have a few clients that are actually tracking the amount of electricity or their cost for net metering, and they tell me, Jonelle, it would be nice if we can get more from our utility, back from our utility. It would help for us to get a better ROI. So it's be a wonderful opportunity if we can help and speak on behalf of our customers today to increase their ROI and their potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the speakers we have. Chairman Sussler, if you want to come back up, I'll give you a few short time to close. We were going to have a hard stop at 3. I disrupted things by leaving, so we're 5 minutes over that. A couple of things that I would like you to work on, and you can address if you want to address them briefly, but you mentioned your concern and your wish for everyone to be paid back on an equal time frame. Mom and pop, I believe is what you said, to be paid back in the same time frame as a commercial solar, you know, utility solar or neighborhood solar.
The same duration of return on capital, yes, sir.
Right, yeah. And you know, so looking at that, I would just ask you that, you know, if you have a big dump truck and a large, you know, tandem truck, and then you have a pickup truck, and you're carrying dirt for a living, you're not going to get returned back at the same efficiency because you're not as efficient. I mean, we know that utility scale solar is more efficient than neighborhood, is more efficient than rooftop, but you won't. I want you to come back to us and explain how the payback needs to be the same. The other question we keep, and I'm going to have somebody, you know, with Chairman Parsons, if he'd like us to have another meeting to discuss this, from the PSC that's going to bring, you know, some information, and we're going to talk about the physics of electricity because I think that's very important. Because, I mean, electricity is energy. It causes these lights to come on. It causes us to heat our house. Using another view of that, if I buy finished firewood, a cord of wood at my house for $100, and they bring it and drop it off, and I pay $100, and then I look over there and there's a tree on the stump that would make about a cord of wood, the guy is not going to give me $100 for that tree because he's going to have to chop it up, cut it down, split it, haul it to somewhere else. And that's the same kind of thing when we're looking at electrons inbound and outbound. So that's what I want to ask you to work with us on that. And then the last thing is, to the extent that you can help us identify, it is a bit troubling to me that to hook onto a system has such a wide variety, you know, from $20 to $155 a month. You know, I'd like to understand that a little bit better. But with that, if you could just take a couple minutes and close us out, and so we can get to, I know there were others that had 3 o'clock meetings as well. if we could move along. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the members of the committee's indulgence. I would say also one thing, as you think about the backdrop of this is not a new issue. In 2001, the General Assembly passed the Cogeneration Act, which this bill seeks to amend. In the passage of the Cogeneration Act, in fact, we have in the full committee, I shared a letter from the sponsor. The Cogeneration Act, in layman's terms, says that this balancing will happen on the billing period. The author of the Cogeneration Act in 2001 believed we were doing a monthly netting bill when they passed it. Now, we could talk about, is the billing period a 15-minute snapshot in which billing is done, or is a billing period when you and I and other residential customers pay our Georgia Power bill or our EMC bill? I pay mine to Cobb EMC every month. And that was the intention of the Cogeneration Act back in 2001. There's a whole array of folks that say, gosh, the law already says this. We're just not following the law. Well, this bill certainly intends to make it very, very, very clear what this means. Because as the chair said, it is certainly my intention to create this sense of fairness. It is certainly my intention to recognize something I think we all can recognize. There are cheaper ways to produce power than solar. There are ways to produce power with natural gas, coal, nuclear. There are ways to produce power more cheaply, but we're making a commitment as a state to produce power at a more expensive rate by making solar the percentage of our mix that we've already committed to. We've already made the decision as a state we're willing to pay more cost for solar, but let's do it well. Let's be wise about how we do it. Let's not be unwise. I would agree with that. I only want to do what's fair. There's nothing in this bill that's for any company or one person. There's folks that came and spoke for my bill today that I simply want a fair deal for them. I'm not trying to win for one side or the other. But in my opinion, a fair deal is that mom and pop should get a return on their capital that's consistent with what Wall Street investors get on theirs. And that's what this bill would do by creating the dynamics that I believe creates a fair balance of payments. Now, if what's proposed here can be made more fair by breaking down the dollar in the way that the chairman alludes to, I'm open to that conversation. That's really why we brought this bill. Let's get to a place of fairness. And again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your helping, as I just close, to really lean in on that side of the fees that you're paying $20 per month to $155 per month just because you have a system on your roof. I think that gets back to this issue of fairness. What is fair? And I appreciate this committee's attention to helping us find that place for all Georgians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I know there were a couple of questions of folks, and if you can get those to Mr. Doss up here, we'll get them to the witnesses or the folks that testified. If they'd like to do that, we'll try to get that. But just in the interest of time, we'll have another opportunity. I know there's somebody from the PSC here. I see. Okay, I don't have my contacts. If we get together again, I want Mr. Doss to get with you for a couple of things. I want you to tell us, have somebody come and tell us about the pilot project, because I think what we're talking about doing in this bill when we get to 5 or 10% and see what's going on was the original plan for the pilot project. The gentleman says yes. So to the extent you're not quite ready for that report, but if you could tell us about how that would go, I would appreciate that. And then I will get with Chairman Parsons, because I don't want to get too far over my skis. We're just a subcommittee. We are the energy subcommittee. But I think it would be good to have somebody from the PSC to talk to us a little bit more about the physics of the generation, that the grid is actually a large machine, and it goes all the way from a generation plant to when somebody flipped that switch on back there. That's actually what makes the generator. If you have a dead circuit, until you flip the switch and use some power, really no power is generated, because power doesn't get created unless there's a need. You don't store power on the grid anywhere. There may be something left over to drain out of a transformer, but you don't store it. So I think it would help us to understand that, the ubiquitous nature of the power. With that, and with folks having places to go, let me thank all the subcommittee members. Thank you, Chairman Sessler, for bringing this, and we'll keep this bill under advisement. Seeing no further comments or questions from the subcommittee, we'll adjourn without objection. I see no objection. We are adjourned.
Sure.